What is up, guys? It's John Nelson, and you're listening to the Starting Block Podcast. Guys, this is a show for complete athletic development. You know the mission is to give you the tools to win, whether you're the athlete, the parent, or the coach. If you're new to the show, welcome. As always, we appreciate you joining. We are slightly different than your standard podcast, as you will come to find out. There are actually multiple shows within the show. Number one, you're going to get a Q&A from us. That's where we'll tackle the questions you guys submit to us. That can be anything related to the rehab, the nutrition, the neuro voodoo stuff, the strength, speed, power training, all of it we'll tackle it there. You can reach me at Coach John ELP on Instagram. Chris, where can they get you?
Fast and Agile 49.
Episode number 2, guest interview. That's going to be what we got today, and I'll bring our guest on here in just a second. But the guest interview is like every other podcast on the planet. That's where we're going to bring in friends, colleagues from across the globe at this point, and they're going to share their stories of success, what they do with their clients, their athletes, their patients. And ultimately, it's somebody that you can network with, somebody that shares the same core value and mission that we do, somebody that preaches the truth. And then the final episode is going to be, if, as I've been saying for the last couple months, if we can ever get it rolling again, we'll get back to doing some of the athlete spotlights and some of that Friday fire. But guys, that's the show. That's how we operate. Secondly, we don't run ads on the show. So we do ask that if you get value out of this, just share the show. There's no click the link in my bio. Like, I'm not that type of guy. Neither's Chris. You know, I don't do all that. All we ask is if you get value out of it, just share the show, man. We appreciate it. Help us spread the word. And, yeah, I think that might be a record time for the intro.
Nice job, John.
It only took 3.5 years. But, yeah, man, without any further ado, we are unbelievably excited and blessed to have Coach Rolf Oman, the co-founder of 1080 Motion, and honestly one of the greatest coaches in the world. So, Rolf, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. We were talking off air, and I told him just to kind of pause and like, let's just pick that up, like right where we were, Chris, is like you were saying, there's where we wanted to go with this episode was just, there's so much I don't like to use the term misinformation. I sound political when I say that, but there's just so much misinformation out there, you know?
Well, it's like there's a lot of internet celebrities, right? There's a whole bunch of them. And how do the listeners of other podcasts, how can they discern what is truth? What's fiction? What's just, and let's talk shop. Let's talk, how do people really get faster? How do they jump higher? How do they do
here's something
these
I'm going to
things?
say before we just start to open the floor real quick, because Rolf, I'm going to open the floor to you completely. I tell people, like, especially when they're new to our show, is this is an elementary show. Not so much because of our audience, but more so because of the host. So, you know, talk to me like I'm a kindergartner.
Well, I think one thing that I've learned, and this is something that I was a bit of a rebel at school, when teachers would tell you, you know, this is the truth, and then as time goes by, well, research and other things show that what we were taught at time period A over at B or at time period C is not valid anymore. And we know now if we look at what's going on in space research, we know, for example, that the laws of gravity, as we know them on this planet, a lot of scientists say that they're absolute. Well, hang on. No, they're not, because you only need to go to the moon and all of a sudden gravity is 1/7. And we know now that there are things happening out in the universe around black holes and so forth that completely and utterly obliterate everything that we think are, you know, laws of gravity and so forth. So therefore, the truth is very much situational. You know, I mean, in most cases, somebody will say, well, this is what we did to get fast. Well, is that then, if that's a completely different approach to what I would use and Randy, for example, uses and Rainer and a few other guys that I work with, it might be. Does that mean then that this method doesn't work? Well, obviously it does work. But now comes the kicker, and this is where it gets sort of I don't know, scientific or whatever you want to call it, but this is where it sort of differs. If you produce one athlete, that's great, but that doesn't mean that you've got a system that actually can reproduce time and time and time again the same results. And this is where, when you look at somebody like Randy, for example, I mean, it doesn't matter.
Randy Huntington, by the way. You're talking Randy Huntington, correct? Yes.
Yeah, the chief, the boss. Will always be. There's no denying that. Now if you look at Randy, how many? Well, now it's feet and inches. So how many 27-foot long jumpers has he had in the US? A whole bunch. Okay, so he goes to Korea first, and they haven't had any jumpers jumping that far. It takes him, 2 years? Then they've got 3. He wanders over to China, and all of a sudden in the group that I worked with him for 2 years in China, we had 4 guys over 27.5 feet. And then he produces a guy that is washed up as a sprinter, becomes the fastest accelerator of all time, and has run a 980-300 and set the Asian record and made the first Asian to make an Olympic final. So the fact is that if you can do these and reproduce these results, not just reproduce the results, but you're going to different cultures, which has huge implications. And I'll be the first to admit that. When I came to China in 2015, I thought, I'm pretty good at what I do, so forth. Well, you can forget all that, because now all of a sudden there's a whole new ball game out there. There is no process. There is no sort of thinking way ahead, like on a 3-year or 2-year plan or wherever. It's like, okay, let's just throw 50 people up on the wall and just see what sticks. Now, that's not a process. That means that you've just got to be lucky. Now, if you've got a huge population, you can do that. And if it's acceptable by society that you actually take 50 people and literally just chuck them against the wall and see what sticks. Now, here in Australia, for example, if I was to take 50 young kids, let's say 15, 16-year-olds, and just absolutely belt the crap out of them, first of all, in Australia, you've got to have what's called a blue card, which, for child safety and the whole thing. So you'd have that organisation all over you like a rash if you started doing that sort of a strategy. So, there's a lot of things then that, we see in other countries that they can do and so forth that we can't do in the West, and we shouldn't do, anywhere. So what is the truth? Well, first of all, I think you've got to have, an approach to speed and power development for running fast or jumping high or far, that you've got to analyze the event. That's the first thing. And that sort of brings us a little bit back to, why am I the original founder and the inventor of the 1080 technology? Very quickly, there was a project in Sweden that was done on pro hockey players. I worked for 10 years in pro hockey. I had enough for track and field and so forth. So I was in pro hockey for nearly 10 years. Now, within pro hockey, they did a project with one of the leading universities in Sweden where they were looking at super maximal eccentric training. So basically, they got a couple of electric motors so they can hoist up and down massive amounts of weights. So they'd hoist up 300 kilos and then they'd just let it fall at a certain speed. And then the athlete would get underneath and just try to resist this on the way down. And then they'd hoist it back up and then they'd do another rep, hoist it back up and do another rep. So they would do, let's say, 3, 4, 5 repetitions, multiple sets, and that was it. Now, what did they get out of that study? Well, the interesting thing is I managed to catch that study, the back end of it. And what sort of opened up my eyes was the fact that a bunch of years prior to this, I had met a chap called Charlie Francis when I was living at home here in Australia. And at that stage, I thought, well, I've done a lot of coaching courses. I've got, a degree, blah, 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 yada, yada. And thought I knew shit. Turns out I knew absolutely nothing. And that was probably, I think, to be honest, the meeting I had with Charlie, and then I also had a very similar meeting with the late Charles Poliquin as well. Now, Charles was, of course, part of the Canadians track and field program. He did most of the strength and conditioning for Ben. Now, because of what happened with what transpired during the '88 Olympics, everything that Charlie was doing and stood for and was saying was deemed as being, oh, this is just drug crazed, rubbish. Nobody can use this. So if you, for example, in Sweden, if I got up in front of the National Coaching Association and said, well, in 1986, Charlie Francis said this, then the room would go quiet and somebody would more or less walk down and tell me, you don't mention the word Charlie Francis here. That's how far it got. So we couldn't even talk. So that means, okay, so that everything that Charlie had done and everything that he, that it basically, Randy and I and a few other people, a lot of the thinking that went behind programming and his vertical integration and his speed development is the brainchild of what and just an extension of what Charlie was doing back then. The difference is that we are, if I might say so, we are much, much better at strength and conditioning for the purpose of running or jumping than what Charlie was, because one, we've had more time to develop and think about this. Two, we've got technology that he could only have dreamt of. So going back to the project then in Sweden with the pro hockey players, this was called Breakman, and the data they got out of that was simply that you got massively strong, but nothing. But apart from that, their jumps. So they had a test they were doing. They did a squat jump. So you went down to about 90 degrees, stopped 3 seconds, and then you did a squat jump. Or you did a counter movement jumps where you can use elasticity. Now, the interesting thing is when you do these two tests, you should have a differential. So as soon as you're able to use the counter movement elasticity, you should jump higher. Now, with the hockey players, two things is evident. Number one, they're always in a seated position when they're skating. They're not in extension, and they push out to the side. They don't push down and backwards. So things are a little bit different. But also the fact that when you look at hockey players, most of them, if they jump 47 centimeters, for example, in let's say 25 inches in a squat jump, they'll jump 25, 26 inches in a CMG. In fact, some of them will actually jump less with the CMG.
Wow.
So that tells you then that but the thing is, they're extremely strong, that they can develop massive amounts of force. So with this, and when I met Randy, when Randy was on tour and he was lecturing in Europe, and then when he brought me over to China, I went over to Exos back in 2000. Oh, must have been 13, I think, when I set up the operations with the 1080 company, which was my company back then. It wasn't called 1080. With the quantum machine, I went over to Arizona to show Randy the quantum, and of course Randy is a huge Kaiser man, and for good reasons. And we talked and we connected, and then a year later Randy called me and said, look, I want you to come to China and work in China. We need you over here. And then the Chinese bought a bunch of quantum systems. Now, what is the quantum? Well, the quantum is an electrically operated system that has two towers connected between a Smith machine, so you can do things in the vertical, but it also has about 5-6 meters of cable travel each tower. So you can do things from a stand position, you can do lateral movements, you can do jump movements, and assisted or resisted, because you've got about 5-6 meters of travel. But the other thing is you can completely revamp what you do eccentrically. So you can do things, because
develop this elastic, so in other words, this thing that these hockey players have lost, the ability to be elastic from doing pure strength training, if you will. Now you're trying to rebuild that. Is that kind of where we're going?
Yeah, but the thing that we learnt with these hockey players, which we then tested with a power lifter in Sweden who had what did he have, a 660-pound bench or something? He was a world record holder. Now, Randy was saying to me, and Randy had this philosophy that he'd been working with, and he virtually kept it to himself and a couple of coaches that he mentored. And what he was saying was that he called it DIS, dynamic isometric strength. And what Randy was proposing was that in the later parts of the eccentric movement, there is no lengthening of fiber. It goes into an isometric state. Now we know exactly that is the case. It's called the filament winding theory. Now, normally, filament sliding is myosin and actin doing this, and they grab on, and that creates friction. Filament winding is a calcium deposit that gets wound up, and what it does is it locks myosin and actin, so they are locked isometrically, but then there's a protein called titin that acts like a bungee cord, and it allows these two guys to move. So this is the filament winding theory. And there's a professor called Professor John Cronin from New Zealand and a Professor Sato in Japan. They actually proved that this theory and that this is what's happening. So all of a sudden, Randy's DIS theory was not a theory. It was pure and absolute science. Now, what we learned from the first project that I learned, and Randy was saying things like, well, I think there's more than one trigger here. And that is when I sort of said to him, well, that's why I built the Quantum, because I wanted to be able to move eccentrically very fast, but I also wanted to deload. So if I went down with, let's say, 150 kilos, 330 pound, when I hit the bottom, so I've de-accelerated 330 pound, but once I hit the bottom, I wanted to go back and explode up concentrically with, let's say, 150 pounds. I could do that. I just tell the system exactly what I wanted to do, and it does that. And away you go. Now, that, of course, meant that now we've got something which is completely like science fiction. What the hell can you do with this? But what we found is that the filament winding has two triggers. One is velocity. The other is load. So therefore, weightlifters, they are sort of they're more or less stuck in the middle. They're not velocity, but they're not force. They're not quite midway. They're more towards the force than they are towards velocity, because they only move the bar at about 1.6, 1.7 meters per second. That's about it. Because they've got maximum amount of load. But if you look at, for example, a power lifter, which is the silliest name for a sport there is, because there is no power. There is no power in it. It should be called something else, because it's all force. It's force production. But anyway, so if you move something extremely slow, but with a massive amount of resistance, you trigger the filament winding, and it then adapts to what you are doing. So in other words, you get good at what you train. Now, we did an experiment in Sweden with a guy who was I believe he was world record holder for a short period of time in the bench, and I think he benched like 370 kilos, which is it's 360 kilos is 720, that's 790.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah, 790.
It's a lot.
It's a stupid amount of weight. And we compared him with an Olympic finalist in the discus who had a PB of about 212, 215 kilos. So what's that?
500-ish, somewhere in the 500 range.
Yeah, somewhere in there. So you would then expect that the power lifter, who could lift nearly double that, not quite, but 70% more, would be able to outperform him. But that wasn't the case. So we started at 20 kilos, and we went 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, all the way up. And we measured everything. The first thing that came out of this was that the powerlifter, he had the same velocity virtually at 20 kilos he had at 160 kilos, 320 odd pounds. It was the same tempo. And then we asked him, look, Johnny, his name was Johnny. We said, Johnny, you're going to have to move fast, mate. We want you to go as fast as you can. Oh, I'm going as fast as I can. Oh, okay. And by the time he got to 200 kilos, 440 pounds, he was moving the same speed. There was no difference. So we doubled the load, but the tempo was exactly the same. All the way up. And now comes the crazy part. So when the discus thrower, he bombed out, I think, at 212 and missed. He got 210, and then he was supposed to do I think we went up in 10s then because he was at his maximum. So he got 210 kilos, which is 450, 460 pounds or something like that. Now, he was still moving that amount of weight, which was his maximum, much, much, much faster in both directions than what Johnny was doing, whose 210 kilos was only, 60% of his maximum? Now, according to studies and the experts, then Johnny should have been able to move this 210 kilos like crazy, but he couldn't. So going back to what Randy said then with DIS and the filament winding theory is that there are two triggers. So you've got to make sure then that you understand, what am I doing in my event? What are my ground contact times? Now, a world-class sprinter, about 85 milliseconds. A world-class high jumper, 160 to 240 if you're a speed jumper or a power jumper. World-class male long jumper, about 120 milliseconds. That's what time you've got on the board to do what you've got to do. Okay, so now that we know the race, now we've got to build the car. It's as simple as that. I mean, it is as simple as that. So this is where I think where we initially started with this, that, that a lot of people are, sort of searching for the truth out there.
Can I jump in real quick, Rolf?
Yep.
So you basically have kind of, you've almost kind of stated that there are two disproven theories out there, and that is the more weight you lift, the faster you can move something lighter, and B, just because you move something fast, it doesn't mean you're weak.
Well, no, exactly. And this is also the interesting thing. When we look at sprinters, for example, we don't chase maximum numbers. We chase maximum velocity at everything we do. If we've got 100 pounds on the bar, we move it as fast as we can.
Right.
In that exercise. If we've got 200 pounds on the bar, we will move it as fast as we can. And we measure things like time to peak velocity and peak velocity. Now, time to peak velocity is an acceleration index. And then we look at something what we also came up with, which is called the EA index, which is the elastic acceleration index. So you take peak velocity and divide it by time to peak velocity. So it shows you how good you are at a CMG, a counter movement lift. So in other words, how fast can you go eccentrically and get out of it concentrically and do something with it? And what you find is with hockey players, for example, when you test them, their EA is like 1.7, 2.2. It's virtually zero. It's nothing. And then when you start working them a little bit differently, then all of a sudden now their numbers start to creep up. So the interesting thing then is, of course, once you start to understand your event, what does my event physically, demand of me as an athlete? Well, then now we know. So we know what the race is about. Now we build the race car. And that's a process. And that can take, depending on what you've got in front of you, what you've got in front of you, it might take 1 year, it might take 3 years. It all depends on, what you've got to work with and how old they are.
Yeah.
And with what I just said, what we have found is with our jumpers and sprinters, despite that we'd never, ever chase heavy singles and stuff like this, which would, it be what we would call maximum strength training, these guys are extremely strong. So we've learned then that the faster you move these weights, the more your maximum strength increases. And it does that over the whole sort of force velocity profile, which, by the way, Hill was a very smart man back in 38, but that's also flawed.
Right. It doesn't
Because
take into consideration elastic qualities, does it
no,
not? Yeah.
no elasticity, no fascia, nothing.
Right.
Yeah. So it's an interesting table, but it doesn't tell you the whole truth. So if you're
Right.
sort of only going down that rabbit hole, you're going to get stuck.
Yeah. 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 That's like that was a purely the cross section or the actin-myosin pure strength. That's really what that's taking into consideration,
Yeah.
minus everything else.
Mine is everything else. Yeah.
Right. So, which is pretty important stuff, by the way.
Well, yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah, definitely.
so now, okay, we know how to, if we're going to lift. Okay, yes, I mean, we want to be able to lift anytime we do it. We want to do it as fast as possible. So, but let's back up. So let's go into other things. So there's still things that you look for. You've gone over some of those things. Like you want to have rapid ground contact time. You want to be able to load and unload as fast as possible. And that's especially true in the case of a sprinter. I think you said like eight millisecond, which is 800ths of a second, or I think you said 8500ths of a second, something along that line.
Yeah.
So it's very, very short contact time. You've got to be able to load and unload that limb, I guess you could say. So what are other things? I mean, let's talk pure speed right now. Let's just talk linear speed. What do we do? Lift as fast as possible. That's one. What are some ways we can get off the ground quicker?
Well, it's interesting. One of the first things that Randy started talking about when I met Randy, and he was, again, I listened to a few of his lectures back in Europe in the day. And then when I started working with him, and that is that what is the first thing that hits the ground? Well, your foot. And the foot's connected to the ankle bone, and that little song, and the ankle bone is connected to the knee bone, and so forth. Now, in between the ankle and the knee, you've got a couple of muscles. One's called the gastroc, and the other's called the soleus. And now all of a sudden, you've got to yank the handbrake, because this is where things break down very, very quickly. Because what we've seen is that a lot of athletes, especially jumpers and sprinters, do not have, by any stretch of the imagination, the type of capacity that they need for their event in the soleus muscle. The soleus muscle is extremely important. In sprinting, it is the main stabilizer when you're in support position, and it is what handles all the loading, principally when you hit the ground and start to amortize the forces coming down. They've got to be captured and then redistributed, which is what we do. So your foot comes in and your foot comes out. It's a V. So what we try to do, it actually looks like a U in the beginning with athletes and kids. And what we then do is make it into a V, and then we make that V more and more pronounced. So that means that going in and going out, especially the going out and the going, it doesn't really matter, but the amount of time that you've got from once you hit support and you came in here, that position from there to there, that's when you load the calf muscle and the soleus muscle. And then from support to push off is where you unload. So we know then that whole sequence takes 85 milliseconds. But what we are trying to do now with the help of technology, which has been a bit of a problem, but it looks like we've cracked the nut, because, again, Randy said that there are athletes that are genetic freaks. And what it means by that is they can simply load the spring much faster than everybody else. So let's say that you and I have got the same ground contact time. Let's say that we've got 100 milliseconds. If we were to break it down and look at it, I can load at 30 and unload at 70. There's 100 milliseconds. You, on the other hand, you can load at 20, but it takes you 80 to get out. But the fact that you can load 20 means that we can speed up the coming out much, much more, because you've got this capacity of much higher loading ability. That's where the secret is. How fast
So now
can
is
you
that
load?
measurable? Is that measurable, Rolf? Now with that loading, how quickly?
Well, yeah. Well, this is where it got interesting. I mean, I got a hold of the brain trust at Hawkins Dynamics, and I said, look, guys, I've got a problem I need solved. So I told them I need to be able to measure the eccentric, concentric time phases. And they said, oh, we do that now. And I said, no, you don't. And they said, oh, yes, we do. And I said, well, I've got Muscle Lab, which does the same thing. And it gives me an eccentric value and a concentric value. And it's a total time. But I said, there's one thing missing. And they said, oh, what do you mean? Well, down the bottom there, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got to stop. And they went, and the room went quiet. And they said, and then they came back and said, no, there's actually not a stop. Well, it is, because what happens, man, this is what Randy and I, have discussed at great length. There might not be, like, if you were to go drive into a brick wall or a mountain, a solid mountain wall, there is definitely going to be a stop. That mountain's not going to move a millimeter. It's going to be there. Or there might be a bit of crumpling, but the most crumpling is you and the car that's hit it. But the thing is, when you are dealing with structures like the human body, then you've got fascia, you've got tendons, you've got even bone has movement. There are deformation zones in the bone and so forth. So you're going to have a situation where, if we look at that V, down the bottom here, then there is a stop. But the stop is not that acute. It's more the fact that the V comes down and then it flattens out. So it flat lines and then it goes back up again. That is, I think, where they've got it sort of, they don't quite understand what's going on. And that is what's interesting, because if we can very quickly do a test on a 15, 16-year-old, because this is genetic, we can then immediately see what sort of capability or capacity do you have in this turnaround. If your turnaround looks different and it looks like this, well, then we know that you are predominantly an athlete that, yeah, sure, you can be fast, but you're not going to be lightning quick. You're not going to run a 9.5 or a 9.6 for 100 meters. You might run 10.1 or 10.2, but you're not going to be able to run 9.6 because you simply cannot load and unload fast enough. It's pure physics. So therefore, that's of interest. But the problem is then that, a lot of people say, oh, Jesus, you need all this technology. Yeah, well, yes, you do, but no, you don't. You just need to sort of think a little bit differently when it comes to strength and conditioning, that, all this grinding, it's of absolutely no avail. Just forget it. It's just a waste of time. You're going to build cross-sectional area, yes, but are you going to build power per se? But now comes the real kicker. Despite all of what I've just said, there are athletes who we've tested in Europe with muscle biopsies who still can't run faster than 10:40, 45, but their genetics tell you that these guys should be running way, way quicker. So then there's two possibilities. One, their training program is definitely not optimal, and that we've seen. But number two is they have another limiting factor, and that is they simply don't have enough elasticity, so they can't reposition fast enough. So when they reach a certain velocity horizontally, they simply can't get the wheel around quick enough. So when the foot is released and it's got to come back up and through and down, it gets stuck because there isn't enough elasticity at the velocity that you're moving. And now that's where we come into the 1080 sprint. Now, why did I want to build the 1080 sprint? Simply because we needed to find the elastic threshold, because doing assisted running, which is getting help up to your maximum speed. Let's say if you can run 10 meters per second, all I'm doing is pulling you at somewhere between 9 and 10 meters per second. What can I do with that? Well, I can do more runs at close to or very close to maximum velocity, and I'm not going to tire you. So, for example, if we could run, let's say, 2 sets of 440s at 95% without any help, now we might be able to run 3 sets of 4 because we're getting assisted. We're getting a little bit of assistance. We're not running faster per se meters per second. We're just getting some help. So therefore, we can relax a little bit. We're not, the energy expenditure isn't as large. So therefore, I'm neurally just getting a little bit more efficient at operating at 94, 95%. Okay, so that's good. But then comes the one that it breaks the bank in most cases. And I don't want to knock 1080. I don't, like I said to you, I've sold my shares. I have nothing to do with 1080. Well, actually, they don't want anything to do with me or Randy because we know too much and they don't. And they have persisted in not listening to us. And I mean, instead of listening to 2 people or a bunch of people that are pushing the limit and are unraveling things like the filament winding theory and EA indexes and so forth, and we're producing results at the world-class level, then you think that maybe they should listen to us, but they don't. But anyway, so overspeed. Now, what is overspeed? Now, this is when you're running at not 100%, but 102.5% and maybe 104, 105%. And now comes the most important facet in this. Once you start going above 100%, now we're in sort of, the Trekkies' favorite word, you're going where no man has ever been. In this case, you're now moving your limbs and you're repositioning faster than you've ever done before. So what can we see from that? Well, if we then start pulling people, we can then see very, very quickly when their elastic threshold is met. And this is where, a lot of people just haven't understood what overspeed training is for. It's not just a matter of grabbing somebody and saying, okay, we're going to pull you as fast as possible. Because if they can't reposition, you're just going to break their technique completely. And it is also very, very imperative that when you are doing overspeed work, it is a process. And the faster the athlete becomes, once you're getting sprinters who are running at 11.5 meters per second and above, this becomes very, very critical because they don't tolerate as much as what people think they do. Because we're now operating at a level which is 102.5%. I mean, if you think about it, if you put 102.5% of your maximum 1 RM in the squat, how many reps are you going to do?
0.
Exactly. Zero.
Right.
0. But now all of a sudden we might be doing 3 or 4 30s or 40s at 102.5%.
Right.
So that has huge implications, and every athlete is different. I've seen athletes that we've pulled at ridiculous speeds, and they're still positive. They're still able to reposition, and it's way faster than that they've ever run on their own.
So it's real. So this repositioning thing is a more critical KPI, key performance indicator, on whether or not you continue than is the percentage of the maximum.
Oh, absolutely. And it also shows that you've got athletes who've got, let's say, a fiber composition that maybe not the absolute best, when it comes to how much fast twitch fiber do you have, percentage-wise. But if you've got a decent amount of fast twitch fiber, but you've got an enormously high elastic threshold, you can do some absolutely extraordinary things with that athlete. So there are multifacets in what chemistry and what makes an athlete or breaks an athlete. And these things, once you get into what we're doing, because basically what we're doing is Formula One. We're asking people to do things which you know, how many percent of the population can run 10 flat to start off? Now, 10 flat is fast, but is it going to win you an Olympic final? Oh, hell no. You know, you're going to read, you know, Bolt, the world record is 9:58. So, you know, you're going to have to sort of get it down to probably 9:7 or thereabouts if you're going to win an Olympic final. Now, do the maths. How many guys per year run that? Maybe 2 or 3. So what is 2 or 3 guys who can run 9:7 in a season compared to 7 billion people on the planet? I mean, it is a massive amount of 0.000000001% of the population. So in other words, we are doing things which is absolutely mind-boggling, and people don't quite grasp that. But is it impossible? No, of course not, because we have people that do these things. But in order to do these things, we've got to be able to understand what have we got in front of us, what tools have we got available at a given time. And now comes, I think, where a lot of people get it wrong on social media, is that everybody's looking for the exercise, the routine.
Right.
There is no magic bullet. There is no silver bullet. There is no magic routine. It's hard, scientific, consistent work with a process, which means that we are trying to do things with certain KPIs, like elastic threshold, like time to peak velocity. And these things need to be built over time. And it takes 12, 18, 2 years to get from A to B.
So just let me make sure I got that. So just expanding on that elastic threshold, you're saying is the primary driver in correcting the repositioning issue. Is that right? Did I understand that right?
Well, it's yeah. Well, repositioning is the body's ability to, you know, elastically coordinate at high velocity. So once a certain terminal velocity is reached, then you simply can't reposition because things are just moving too fast. So if you remember, as kids, I'm sure you've been out in a park somewhere, or, you know, here in Australia, we used to play golf, and then, you know, you'd run down the hill, you know, chasing your ball. And some slopes, they'd be like this, and your legs would go like, you know, like crazy. And, you know, 5 times out of 10, you'd go arse over tit because your legs just simply can't keep up.
Right.
So therefore, I've reached my elastic threshold. And what happens if I'm on a slope like that? Well, I fall over. It's as simple as that.
Right.
Now, if you do the same thing but on the flat, what happens when you hit the elastic threshold and you keep going? Well, that's when you start pulling things. In other words, this is when hamstrings go, quads go, adductors go, and you know, all sorts of other things. You know, it's just pure science.
And
Right.
more Nordic hamstring curls are the answer for that, right?
Oh yeah, that's well, see.
I did my research on you. I know.
Well, yeah, but this is where, again, we're talking about truth. Having said that, and if you've listened to some of my podcast, does that mean that the Nordic hamstring is a shit exercise? No, I haven't said that at all. But for a sprinter at world class, it takes 4 days for them to recover from a decent bout of Nordic hamstrings. So, number one, 4 days to recover. Okay, that's not a good trade-off. Number 2, is it actually giving me what I need? Remember what I just said. We're moving at a step frequency, depending on their length. Now, Bolt, for example, had a step frequency of what, 4, 5, 4, 6?
Right. His was not actually that fast. Right. His was actually, yeah.
Because he has a huge step.
Right.
Yeah. And he can put a lot of force into the ground, and therefore he has a big step. Sue, on the other hand, had 5.1 in frequency. Very, very high frequency, but he's only 173 tall. So with that said, then, you know, you're going to have to sort of look at, if you're moving at, let's say, 5 steps a second, you've taken 5 steps, that is going to have some huge, you know, ramifications as far as your elasticity. Now, if your soft tissue simply can't handle this, then you're in trouble. A couple of guys that I work with here in Australia now who are very, very much more intelligent than I am, and they've got PhDs and all these sorts of things. They did a project a while back. I lent them one of my sprinters, and what they've done is a tissue compliancy study. What that means is they looked at the tissues in the calf muscle, and they looked at sprinters from 11 seconds down to 10 flat. And is there a difference? There's a huge difference. So in other words, there is a compliancy of tissue that you need to build up over time to be able to do what you're doing when you're running 10 seconds. So there's not only a big difference in physical capabilities, but there's also a big difference in tissue compliancy in able to run 10 seconds rather than running, for example, let's say 10.5, 10.6, 10.7, which is still fast. I mean, if you can run sub 11, you're a quick person, there's no doubt. But it's a huge difference running 9.7 and 10.7.
Right. Yeah. You're talking about the difference between someone, well, because I'm a track coach. So, I mean, you're talking about the difference between someone being good at the high school, a good male high school sprinter versus an elite Olympic sprinter. That's the difference. That's 1 second in there.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that study showed is that we still have now we have, because of what Nick Cross and Tim, I keep forgetting Tim's name. Oh, geez, they'll shoot me now. But the guys at the Melbourne CBD Physio Clinic, they run the Melbourne Physio Clinic in Melbourne, and they've got a whole bunch of Kaiser equipment and so forth, and isokinetic machinery and a bit of that. But the study that they did on tissue compliancy has given us an enormous amount of insight into how long does it take. For example, we know that we can build strength, in a period, like let's say this period. Now, within that given period, has tendons and tissue to the extent that we're trying to run at 11.5 meters per second, has that improved the same amount? No. It takes longer for tissue and tendons to get to the same level as muscle tissue. So therefore, again, then the elastic properties are not then fully developed. So therefore, you're going to have major breakdowns. So it was interesting when I started working with Randy, and he'd already sort of mentioned that to me earlier. I think when I met him in Arizona in 2013, he said, the elastic threshold is the biggest limiter of straight line speed. And that messed my brain up.
It's one of those challenging things. Yeah, just all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah, because you've got this notion that, well, it's all, if you've got some dude that, picked the right mum and dad, well, bang, he's got all the genetics. Yeah, but if he hasn't got elasticity, he's not going to be able to utilize it because he just simply can't reposition fast enough. Right. So he's not going to run fast, even though he has these fantastic, genetics.
So can someone then, Rolf, someone who's has, let's just say, poor elasticity, can they get good? Can someone who's got decent elasticity get great? To what degree can someone train this quality?
That's what Randy and I've been trying to do, for the last, well, in Randy's case, over 30 years and for nearly 40 years, and I'm thinking, what am I at? About 35. Yeah, you can. Answer to that is yes, you can, to a very, very great degree. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I came to Hong Kong, there was a male long jumper there who had been stagnant at about 770 for the long jump, and nothing had happened in 2-3 years. And these were virtually the best years that he had, like between 21 and 24-ish. Then I came in and, scrapped his training, what he was doing, and put him on the right program. Long story short, 7 months later, he had a foul at 828 by about a half a millimeter in
828. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it was. We had this on tape. It was in Portugal. We were on a training camp, and we went through this. It took us about an hour to finally decide that it was a foul. But the foul is not more than the width of a hair. It's ridiculous. He did later jump 805 or 808, but still that what we tacked on was a foot. And that now 770 is a pretty big jump. You know, that's a good jump. I mean, that's
right.
It's a 26-foot jump. Now all of a sudden you're getting up towards 27 feet or whatever.
Right.
So to
and this
add
was
a foot.
Then I'm assuming then that this is the primary quality though that you're training is this elastic quality that we're discussing here.
Well, part of it is the elastic qualities, but also the eccentric qualities, because now this is where people don't sort of quite understand what's going on. And you see this predominantly with long jumpers, that somebody is jumping okay, and then the coach says, oh, we're not fast enough. Okay, that might be the case. And then they go in and then they do a lot of track work and they get faster, but nothing happens in a long jump because they've missed out the most important part of this is that if you all of a sudden come in at let's say not 10 meters per second, but at 10.7 meters per second, and you're going to do the same amount of time on the board, 120 milliseconds, let's say that's what you're trying to do, or that's your normal jump time, then now all of a sudden you've got to redirect a hell of a lot more force coming in the same amount of time, which means you've had to build rate of force development in the eccentric part of the jump. So in other words, if your eccentric capacity at high velocity hasn't increased to take into account this 10.7 meters per second, you're not going to be able to utilize that 10.7 because what will happen here on the board, instinctively, your system will say, hang on, Rolfie boy, I can't handle this velocity. So you will stay on the board a little bit longer. So now all of a sudden you'll be on the board 130, 140 milliseconds because you're waiting for all your tissue to comply with what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So in other words, basically, you kind of have two choices: slow down or lose control.
Yeah.
It's really your two choices at that point.
Yeah.
And so it's I totally get it. Yeah.
Well, so this is the whole essence of what we're trying to do is to break down these bits and then progress progressively with load. And the progression that you do is governed by one thing and one thing only: recovery. It doesn't matter what I do if the athletes can't recover, then we're fighting a losing battle. And that is, I think, one of the major things. People think that you've got to do, a ton load of work. Of course, we do a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. But we don't do more work than what the athletes can recover from.
And now, when you get into that recovery side of it, correct me if I'm wrong. This may be a very ignorant statement, but I remember you saying that your time to peak velocity for you is a great neural fatigue indicator.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how you're utilizing that to make sure the athletes recover and able to step into that next workout, whatever that may be?
Yeah. What we found very early when we started using the Muscle Lab system was that when we looked at athletes and when we knew that let's say in the cycle that I used 2 weeks of accumulation, a recovery week, 2 weeks of intensification, and a recovery. So my block is 6 weeks. Randy runs 2 3-week blocks, which virtually look exactly the same as mine, without even knowing what Randy had done, because he doesn't disclose those sort of things and he doesn't do podcasts and stuff very often. So it was extremely interesting that when I got over to China and we sat down and discussed, okay, so what does your normal cycle look like? And it was 6 weeks. Now, why 6 weeks? Well, first of all, the traditional periodization as such, I've sort of stayed away from, because I was a decathlete at an international level myself, and I had 9 operations. I mean, I ripped everything apart because we were working on a low week, a medium week, a heavy week, and then a recovery. So recovery was week 4. And the amount of workload I was doing, I couldn't handle 3 weeks. So therefore, I started thinking when I started coaching, I've got to go to 2 weeks, and I've stayed with that. And then I also changed the weeks. So the accumulation means that, for example, we might do cleans from the floor because they have a certain acceleration tempo. Then in the intensification, they'll do hang cleans because now I've got to do the same acceleration, but I've got a shorter range of motion. So therefore, the acceleration, the time to peak velocity, it drops. It becomes faster. So that's how we transition with exercises. So we go from parallel squats to box squats to step-ups because the TPV decreases. And the TPV, we want to get the TPV as close to the ground contact times or slightly better than what the athlete is doing in his or her given event. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. John, I think we've been going an hour, and the I tell you what. So we're probably gonna have to shut this down. But before we do that, Rolf, I mean, first of all, I want to ask you 2 questions. Number one, I think you've produced a course that can probably go through a lot of these details. So I want to give the details of that. But the other question I want to ask is, you're talking about how the whole 1080 thing, is that technology, will it still measure these things that you're discussing and it's just not promoted by the current 1080, or if they completely revamped the device compared to what you invented years ago?
Well, we'll take the first question.
Yes.
If people go into my Instagram Tailwind Squad and write the word masterclass, then it will generate a link to the education platform where this material is available.
Tailwind Squad.
Tailwind Squad
Yes.
on Instagram. And then just write masterclass, and then we'll send you. It'll automatically generate that the system will send you a link, and then you can browse a few things, to see if this is sort of is what you're looking for, and then if you like it, well then you can then purchase it.
Yes.
And there's about 6 hours of material in there.
Right. So there's no way for us to reproduce what's in that course in the 1-hour podcast. It's just not going to work.
No.
I don't know if you feel comfortable answering that second question, Rolf, but because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I am curious. I mean, because let's face it, a 1080 is on one of those coaches like wish list of hopefully I can afford to get one of these one day, because they are, let's face it, they are not cheap.
No, they're not, and I think that's one of the major things that they've got to address. I mean, you can talk about, if you're driving a BMW or an Audi or Mercedes, they're a different price than a Volkswagen, Golf or Rabbit, whatever they're called in the US.
Sure.
So yeah, but I think the main thing is that you've got to understand that what this technology does. And yeah, I don't want to throw other people under the bus, but I think when you've got the caliber of the people that are in my network, if I put it that way, and I'm just one of those people, and if you look at the results that we've had between us, they're ridiculous, and you don't want to listen to us, really. So you're going to people that haven't produced these types of results, and if they have, they've done it maybe once or whatever. It just doesn't make sense. I think the biggest problem is that if we look at the quantum, for example, what the quantum can do, one of the major things that Randy got me to do when I got over to China was that he told me, okay, I don't have to explain to you, because you're the inventor of the 1080 quantum, what Kaiser's all about. But I want you to get your muscle lab system, go out in the gym, and in Beijing we had everything. And I want you to grab somebody and just go through every machine, and I want answers. So that's what I did. Now, does Kaiser work? Oh, hell yeah. There are a couple of things that people don't understand. Number one thing that keeps popping up, and I have a very, very good relationship with Kaiser, thanks to Randy. I've met Dennis on numerous occasions, and we've talked at great length. And also Ty Seven, who's the new president of Kaiser. People still come and say to me and Randy that Kaiser's doesn't have an eccentric phase, which is absolutely preposterous. What people don't understand is that because air is faster than gravity, when you drop very quickly under, for example, if you're doing a standing squat on a Kaiser and you drop very quickly, you're not going to feel that load because of the fact that it's moving so fast. So you'll move. What happens then is it feels weightless. But now comes the kicker. Once you start jamming on the brakes and are going to stop and change direction, all hell breaks loose, because then that machine comes at you like a ton of bricks. So in the DIS phase, as Randy called it, when the filament winding starts doing its thing, that's where Kaiser shines. And now comes the biggest kicker. If you then go over to the rack, because in the rack you can do something which is the only machine in the world that can do this, is the Quantum. And 1080, we're going to phase that out of production because it nobody understood. Well, the problem is they don't understand what it actually does, so therefore they can't sell it. I know, for example, several NFL football teams have sold their machines, and the new owners have contacted me and asked, and they've got them for an absolute song. I mean, it's ridiculously cheap. And that is just ridiculous. You've got one of the most powerful machines. In fact, somebody has actually said that the Quantum is probably the most profound piece of machinery that's come into high-tech sports in the last 30, 40 years. And the company doesn't understand how to use it. So what does a Kaiser rack do? Well, with a Kaiser rack, you can have normal plate-loaded mass, and you've got air. So you've got two types of mass, of resistance. So what you can do then is you can mix, or you can break up the mixture. So you can have an air mass combo. So you can have 50-50. So if you've got 300 pounds, you can have 150 pounds of air and 150 pounds of mass. Now, if we then look at 300 pounds of mass and do some squats over here, and then we go over to a rack, Kaiser rack, and we do 300 pound squats, but we've got a 50-50 air mixture, air mass, is that going to be different? We've got the same amount of total resistance, but we've got 50% air in the rack. Well, it does. It makes a huge difference because now all of a sudden the eccentric phase has just lit up like a Christmas tree. And the more air you add to that total percentage of 300 pounds, so if you were to go 200 pounds of air and 100 pounds of mass, what's going to happen? The eccentric phase, for every percentage of air you add, the eccentric phase goes faster and faster and faster. So there's your progression. And how many people utilize this? Virtually nobody.
Right.
And the only other machine in the world that can do this, but also can then change the amount of weight that you're moving back up, is the Quantum. So here you've got the two most powerful pieces of machinery in the world, and I had at my disposal in China. And what I found then was that there is an optimal line of attacking a high-performance athlete in what you start with exercise, when do you introduce the Quantum, and where does the Kaiser rack fit into the equation? Now we know that.
Now, some of these answers can be found in this course of yours, or can they?
There's I think there's enough there to get people thinking, because what we've talked about already. But I mean, these types of technologies, once you get into these, and this is high performance, and once you get into these things, things happen very, very rapidly. and therefore you need to be, a little bit, wary about how fast you attack the athlete with these things, because it will inevitably mean that their recovery times are going to have to be more scrutinized as far as what are you actually doing with your recovery. You just can't go home and jump on the bed and play PlayStation. That's just not going to cut it. Once you start doing these sort of things, because now the system is going to need some recovery methods with people that are recovery specialists.
Right.
No,
I was just going to say, because we want our audience to know. And John, I mean, please jump in if you got anything to add to this. But guys, there is a difference, and there is a difference between what you hear, and it's like, well, I had an athlete do this, and I had an athlete do that. No. We're talking about what makes not what makes somebody good, but we're talking about elite. And everybody says they want to do that. Everybody says, I want to be elite. I want to be. No, guys, it's like there's like I said, the internet celebrity version of what's elite, and there's what's really elite. And and Rolf has helped produce some of these athletes that are truly the ones that you'll see at Olympic Games and international hockey and everything else, guys. And so I want to just make that point clear. And John, I'm sorry, I kind of
no, I got
took
nothing
the whole.
to add to that. I think that's a great way to say it. I mean, yeah, you're talking about the elite of the elite of the elite here.
Yes.
So yeah, I agree 100%.
But we're still learning. This is what's so incredibly fun about this, is that for everything that we uncover and we see, ooh, that's interesting, then all of a sudden we've got there's a whole new bunch of revelations and questions that pop up. Okay, now we're starting to do this, and we can see that, and then okay, what do we do with this? Some of the things that we uncover, can we use them straight away? Nope, we can't. Back to Nick's and Tim's compliancy study, we're just not ready to do certain things at this stage. I mean, I've had athletes that I've coached, and they've keep yapping on about, oh, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? Because you're not ready, and then they'll, I had an athlete say, oh, you've overcooked me. No, I haven't overcooked you at all. It has to do with how you're recovering. And they all think that this is all static. That if they recovered at a certain time frame over here, and now their physical performance has gone from, whatever time, and we're over here now, so we're a much better athlete, but the recovery is the same. That's what they think. So whatever they did over here, they can do over here. It's like saying that, okay, we started with a decent Formula One car, or even we actually started with something that wasn't a Formula One car, but now we've built a Formula One car. Now, do we service this thing and set it up the same way we did with this? Oh, hell no. Yeah. But the mindset of this individual over here is the same as here. But we've changed everything about this athlete. I mean, apart from the fact that that they have the same name and they look the same, but peel the skin off and start looking in underneath, it's a completely different animal. It's doing things that that are completely different, and we're operating at a completely different level. Yet not all of them, but you do have these individuals that think that they're still here. It's still all the same, but we're over here. Hello, sunshine.
Right.
And some of these people you just cannot talk to them, and they but no. So I've had athletes that have gone out after, and they're in absolutely best shape of their life, and they'll go out and go to a golf driving range and stand there and hit 300 yard drives all afternoon, and then all of a sudden their whole back is wrecked for 2 weeks. I mean, are you kidding me? And this is also something that Randy and I deal with all the time, that high performance is also a high performance mentality. But unfortunately, some athletes are still stuck over here mental wise, but their physical performance is way over here. And there's a colleague of mine in Europe who he has a perfect word for this. They call it gaposis.
Right.
So the bigger this gap is, and that can be training. If you're training at this level, but you're asking your body to do this in competition, you've got a massive big gap. Now, the bigger the gaposis is, the more likelihood is, are you going to get injured? It's more like, when are you going to get injured, and how badly are you going to get injured?
All right.
Now, and the injury can be, in one case, it can be physical, but in the other case, it can be mental. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, apart from maybe one or two guys on the starting line of an Olympic final, everybody is virtually on par physically. But as we know, the results are very, very different because of what goes on up here. So that has to be a journey along with the physical part. And there are, unfortunately, individuals that I mean, Randy says, well, we've got athletes that are smart, and then we've got athletes that are dumb. And that's not being derogatory. It's just mean that they just simply just don't, they're not, their mental sort of state doesn't make the same journey. They're still stuck over here. And now they're over here physically. So, yeah, it's multifaceted. And as I said, we're still learning every day. We still learn. And that's what's so incredible about, the field that we work in. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to call this my not just my hobby as a former athlete, but this is what I do for a living and have done for the last 30 years.
Well, that's why we have you on. That's why we have you on. I mean, it's because we are. Go ahead, John.
Incredibly informative. Yeah.
Yes.
And it has taught me how much I don't know. But you got to keep learning. That's why we appreciate you coming on like that.
Well, thank you.
Up a whole new world to me, and I'm kind of speechless. I got to kind of process this for a minute.
Yeah,
I got to reevaluate a little bit what I'm doing too.
Rolf, we need to get you back on again, and like I said, it
Anytime.
is and again, that's Tailwind Squad on Instagram, and then
Yep.
I'm going to go actually get that course today. So we're and that I think that will
you'll see me in your DMs.
Yes. So we'll definitely get that. And Rolf, we thank you so very much, man. This is it's been again, like John, I got to process it now, and then I'll have better questions next time.
Yeah. Seriously.
That's yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, you get a little bit of new knowledge, and then all of a sudden you can sort of okay. Well, then you get some good questions after that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you and the work you're doing as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.
You're more than welcome. Anytime. All right, guys. Well, y'all know the deal. I know you got plenty of value out of this. So share the show, spread the word, and, go get Rolf's class. So, all right. It's good to talk to you. Have a great day. And, hope we are able to talk again very soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.